In an era where the sea holds the greatest secrets, an announcement changes everything. The most coveted treasure, the One Piece, awaits its next owner. As the race across the seas begins, a young man in a straw hat, Luffy, embarks on a journey filled with challenges, unexpected allies, and formidable adversaries. Amidst epic battles, surprising revelations, and a burning desire to become the king of the pirates, discover the power of a mysterious fruit and the beginning of an adventure that will push the limits of the possible. Prepare to sail the most dangerous seas and unravel the mysteries of One Piece. Here is a mega summary of One Piece the series, an incredible and well-made live-action, Loge Town 22 years earlier. The Marine Vice Admiral, on behalf of the world government, announced that he was combating certain evils to protect the local population. It is then shown that Gold Roger, the king of the pirates, had been captured and sentenced to death. But before departing, the man was confronted by the people, who asked where the treasure he had found was. In response, Roger said he had conquered everything the world had to offer, and urged everyone to free themselves and set out to sea, for the treasure would belong to whoever found it. Shortly after his death, everyone headed for their boats, and so the great pirate era began. As the narrator himself declared, the race across the seas had started, the One Piece. Next, the main character, Monkey D. Luffy, is introduced. Like most people, he too was after the One Piece and had the dream of becoming the king of the pirates. But to do that, he needed a crew, and so he was in search of one to pursue everything he had in mind. It was not easy though. On the very first day, the small boat the boy was on fell apart, losing all the supplies he had set aside. To protect himself, the straw hat hid inside a barrel in the middle of East Blue. Meanwhile, a battle was taking place between two ships, and we are introduced to the pirate Alvida, a well-known and wanted captain. After capturing all the pirates from another crew, Alvida questioned one of them about where the pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro was. In doing so, she discovered she was not among the enemy's targets, and furious, ended up killing the man she was speaking with, and asked Koby to clean up the mess while the woman insisted she was the most powerful pirate of all time. That night, Alvida's servant heard a noise coming from one of the barrels. When he went to investigate, he came face to face with Luffy. At first, he thought he was going to be killed by the straw hat, but then they began to talk. Koby said Luffy didn't seem like a pirate, since all pirates were despicable, murderers and thieves, but the other insisted that not all of them were like that. The scene shifts to a flashback in Fuchsia Village 10 years earlier. Luffy was a child who already dreamed of being a pirate. He woke up to the arrival of Captain Shanks, who had gathered many valuable pieces together with his crew. After the boy said he was also a pirate, the men began to laugh, and Shanks stressed that the sea was very dangerous, and the scars on his face were proof of that. And so, Luffy decided to show everyone that he was not afraid of getting hurt, climbing to the top of the ship and cutting his own face with a small knife. Then we return to the present day, with Luffy and Koby talking again. While one spoke about how fun it was to be a pirate, the other tried to warn him that it wasn't quite like that, since Alvida dictated everything he had to do. Luffy decided to explore the ship and ended up finding an oar. Koby said that to get where he wanted to go, the straw hat would need to row north. But before they could continue their conversation, Luffy ended up waking all the crew members, including Alvida, after hitting a part of the ship with the object. The captain at first thought she was being turned over to a pirate hunter, but at the same time, she didn't feel threatened. She then asked them to shout that she was the most powerful captain in the world, but she didn't hear that from Koby, so Alvida asked him to repeat it, but Luffy stepped in, saying the other boy was free, and also calling her a sea cow. Upon hearing those words, Alvida came at the two of them, but what she didn't expect was that Luffy had elastic abilities and could dodge any attack she threw at him, until at some point, the straw hat grew tired, and after uttering the words "Gum Gum Pistol," launched the woman off into the sea. None of the crew members intervened out of fear of what had happened, and with that, Luffy invited Koby to join his crew. Meanwhile, on Six's Island, Zoro was lighting candles when a man called Mr. Faturn 7, a representative of an organization called Baroque Works, appeared saying he was interested in the pirate hunter's skills. However, his attempts to convince him were in vain. Zoro had no interest in joining the organization and dismissed the man multiple times, until Mr. 7 launched an attack. The two fought, but the pirate hunter had the upper hand, managing to dodge and block his opponent's blows. In the end, he cut the Baroque Works representative in half. The scene cuts to Luffy and Koby on the boat, talking. The boy with glasses asked his friend how he was able to stretch, and we return to the Straw Hat's childhood. There we see the boy talking with Shanks about his dream of becoming a pirate in the future. Though it was clear he wasn't taken very seriously by the captain, Luffy was quite upset and decided to go to the lower deck of the ship, where he found a mysterious fruit. Without thinking twice, he ate the gum-gum fruit. Upon seeing that Shanks had been humiliated by another pirate, Luffy became indignant. While heading to the other side of the ship, the captain ended up grabbing the boy's arm, which stretched. Everyone was quite surprised by that, including the boy himself. Koby was shocked to hear that his new friend had eaten a devil fruit, a kind of cursed fruit that gave him a special ability, which in this case was having a rubber body. Next, the two realized that even though they had an objective, reaching the Grand Line, they had no map to show them the way. For a brief moment, Koby seemed to regret having left Alvida. Shortly after, Luffy asked his friend what his dream was. When Koby revealed that he wanted to join the Marines, the rubber pirate made the following proposal. The two would go to the nearest base, and that way Luffy could get the map that would lead him to the Grand Line. And Koby could enlist, despite seeming like a crazy idea. The other boy agreed, and they set off, headed in some direction. The scene cuts to another location, still in East Blue, where a woman is passed out inside a small boat. Two men spotted her and went to help. However, upon discovering she was a pirate, they tried to steal the supplies on board. What no one expected was that while the two were trying to open the chest, the red-headed woman had been orchestrating a plan. By the time they realized there was nothing inside the box, it was too late. The woman left the two men behind in the small boat, taking their ship in its place. Meanwhile, Luffy and Koby arrived in Shell Town, where the 153rd Marine Division was stationed. The Straw Hat was surprised by the number of wanted pirates posted on the boards, and then suggested to his friend that they go get something to eat. At the restaurant, in addition to devouring many dishes, he kept thinking of various ways to sneak into the base to get the map showing the way to the Grand Line. At that moment, we noticed the red-headed woman is also at the establishment, and shortly after, Zoro also arrives, asking for a bottle of drink. A little girl named Rika headed toward him and offered him rice balls with chocolate. However, Rika bumped into a blonde man and the food fell to the floor. The customer mocked the girl, whose eyes were filling with tears. Zoro ate the rice ball that was on the floor and told the blonde man to try one and apologized to the girl. Again, the man brushed it off and decided to challenge the pirate hunter with his sword. And so they entered into a battle, in which Zoro not only defeated him, but also managed to knock down all the Marine members present in the restaurant. Taking advantage of the moment, the red-headed woman grabbed a Marine soldier's belongings after striking him. Shortly after, the pirate hunter was taken before Captain Morgan, axe hand. Upon arriving there, he said he only wanted to collect the money that had been promised by the captain's son who had challenged him at the restaurant. But Morgan was quite interested in Zoro's abilities, inviting him to join the Marines. The two clashed in a battle of ideas, until at a certain moment, the pirate hunter agreed to spend 7 days imprisoned in the courtyard. That night, Luffy and Koby were reflecting on the boat. While one praised Zoro's abilities, the other was quite saddened to see that none of the Marine members had defended the little girl. In addition, Koby confessed that he knew nothing about the world and didn't know who he was, but the Straw Hat tried to keep the other boy from dwelling on that and asked for help getting into the base and grabbing the map. The next day, Zoro was already imprisoned in the courtyard. Captain Morgan's son came to confront him, demanding that he beg for mercy, and made it clear that his father would leave the pirate hunter there until he died. A short while later, Luffy arrived at the location through a drain pipe, quite lost, until upon looking to the side, he recognized Zoro. The two began to talk, and the rubber pirate invited him to join his crew. Right off the bat, the pirate hunter refused. After all, his job was precisely to hunt down people like Luffy. But shortly after, the Straw Hat confronted the man, asking whether that was all he was, and whether it was all he wanted. Afterwards, Zoro confessed that it was part of a promise he had made to someone years ago. With that, Luffy decided to free him. Promptly, the pirate hunter stressed that he would not be joining the boy, who replied that was fine, but that he thought it was a waste to see someone with such great potential ahead of them remain imprisoned there. Then the rubber pirate left, leaving the other quite pensive. The scene cuts to the red-headed woman inside the map room, searching for the map of the Grand Line. However, the Marine members quickly realized she was an imposter, and a brief battle broke out, one in which the woman came out on top. Then Luffy fell through the ceiling, and the two ended up confronting each other, realizing they had the same objective. As they left the room, The Straw Hat and the red-headed woman walked through the corridors, making their way toward Captain Morgan's office to find the map. But midway, they ended up running into the man himself. As a way to throw him off, the woman said she had been transferred from another base to serve the captain, who didn't recognize her. When he asked her name, she answered that it was Nami. Luckily, the man believed her story and let them pass. Right after, in an impressive manner, Nami revealed she had obtained the keys to Axehand's office. With that, the two made their way to the location. Once there, they began to talk about why each of them wanted the map. Until, by accident, Luffy managed to find the safe. Thinking the map might be inside, they tried to open it, while the alarm blared, and Captain Morgan tried to get in. With that, the rubber pirate used his abilities to rip the object free from the wall, and he succeeded. However, he and Nami ended up falling into the courtyard, along with the safe. Several marine members came at them, and everyone entered into a battle. Shortly after, Zoro entered the scene. At first, he thought about leaving the base, but upon seeing the other two nearly being defeated, he decided to help, knocking down all the soldiers. But then all three entered into a direct confrontation with Axehand. At a certain point in the fight, Zoro warned Luffy that Morgan's entire body was a weapon. With that, the two decided to attack, each coming from a different side. And it worked. After defeating the enemy, the three went to Nami's boat with the safe. Luffy said he was leaving without Koby, but shortly after, Morgan's son appeared, wanting to arrest them. He had his hair cut short, but ended up being mocked by the others. Before the man could take any action though, he was knocked down by a punch from Koby. The Straw Hat was quite excited by his friend's punch, who described how great the feeling was. Shortly after, Luffy called Koby to leave the island with them, but the boy said he would not, since he wanted to join the Marines. He also revealed that he had no autonomy before meeting the Straw Hat, but that now he wanted to follow his dreams. Even though they might be enemies in the future, the two said goodbye as friends. The scene cuts to Garp, a Marine Vice Admiral, receiving news that the safe containing the map to the Grand Line had been stolen, and so he decided to change course towards Shelltown. The episode ends showing a pirate called Buggy, who is characterized as a clown, as well as being one of the most wanted, saying that he too would go after the map. Young Luffy practicing the abilities he had acquired. Then, Makino asked the boy to train somewhere else, since many tables and chairs had been destroyed. Afterward, she warned that she was worried about the child, as nature might turn against him, precisely because Luffy had eaten one of the devil fruits. But that didn't scare him, quite the opposite. It made him even more excited, eager to pursue his dream. Shortly after, Shanks entered the scene. The boy asked to join his crew, seeing as he had acquired special abilities. The man once again refused, saying that didn't make him strong. Shortly after, one of the crew members mentioned that Makino had been providing supplies for months. Luffy immediately realized the captain was going after the One Piece, and when he asked when he would return, Shanks answered that he never would. The news left the boy deeply shaken. The scene cuts to the Straw Hat together with Nami and Zoro sailing at sea. The redhead was trying to open the safe, but the rubber pirate was making a lot of noise, being very animated about their first heist. After countless attempts, Nami managed to open the safe. Luffy was very excited, and Zoro deflated since it contained no gold or jewels. Then the three went below deck, where the redhead showed exactly where the Grand Line was, warning that it was a particularly treacherous area due to the presence of bigger pirates. The Straw Hat was very excited, as he was certain that going there would lead him to the One Piece. The pirate hunter asked what exactly it was, and the boy answered that it was the treasure left behind by Gold Roger. Nami insisted it was a myth, since 22 years had already passed and no one had found it. But before they could continue their conversation, they noticed something strange outside. Red fireworks had been launched into the air, and something about them made Nami and Zoro pass out. Afraid of what it might be, the rubber pirate swallowed the map and went to check on who the threat was. Upon seeing the flag bearing a skull with a clown's nose, we realize it is Buggy's ship. The following day, the three woke up inside a giant crate, with nothing inside. Nami was quite worried when she realized the enemies might have taken the map, but Luffy reassured her by saying it was in a safe place, pointing to his stomach. Then they tried to figure out ways to escape and deal with the adversaries, until the box opened and the trio found themselves inside a circus performance. Shortly after, Buggy entered the scene, complaining that the entire act had gone wrong. Luffy recognized him right away from the posters he had seen in Shelltown. With that, the pirate began to say he had planned to attack the location for months so that he could obtain the Grand Line map, until he was outsmarted by three strangers. Luffy said he was no nobody, stating his full name. Buggy didn't seem to care, pointing out that his face was on every Marine post and that he had the most feared crew in East Blue. So he emphasized that he was destined to find the One Piece and would become king. But again, the Straw Hat denied it and said he would find it first. As a way to distract the pirate, Nami said she had something far more interesting to offer than the map. She then tossed Luffy's hat into the air, prompting him to reveal his elastic abilities. Afterward, the redhead ran outside and saw that the area had been destroyed by Buggy and his crew. She was then recaptured and brought back to the circus. Shortly after, Nami and Zoro were taken to the backstage room so that Buggy could have a conversation with Luffy. The scene cuts to Koby getting ready to be in the courtyard together with other Marine members. There, they received Vice Admiral Garp, who was there to find out what had happened previously. At a certain moment, the man even locked eyes with the boy when he discovered he was a newly enlisted recruit. Meanwhile, Zoro and Nami were held captive in one part of the circus. They ended up having a small argument, but the redhead said she knew a way out. She just needed the pirate hunter to trust her. Even reluctantly, he agreed. With that, she pulled a lockpick from inside her shoe to try to open the cage she was in, until the two heard Luffy scream. He was being increasingly stretched by Buggy, as a form of torture, so the boy would reveal where the map was hidden. But as a way to get the Straw Hat to talk, the enemy began to question why the young man wanted to become a pirate, and discovered it was to impress someone. Afterward, he grabbed Luffy's hat and revealed that he knew a pirate who wore the same hat, then disclosed that Shanks and he had served on the same pirate ship as children and had even been friends until the redhead betrayed him, as he wanted to steal the spotlight from him. Luffy began to grow angry at the way Buggy spoke of Shanks, and upon noticing that, the villain asked for the straw hat to be stretched until he snapped. But one of the women who was pulling the rope refused. With that, Buggy said he would put a child from the audience in the straw hat's place, who quickly broke free and asked him to let the boy go, and so the rubber pirate punched the clown's head so hard it flew off his body. But therein lay a problem. Just like Luffy, Buggy had also eaten one of the devil fruits, called the chop chop fruit, meaning no matter how much someone tried to chop him apart, he could always reassemble himself. With that, the villain used one of his hands to reach the boy, spray a gas in his face, and deliver a punch that knocked him unconscious. The scene cuts to Nami trying to break free, until one of Buggy's men arrived to confront Zoro. He began to say that his brother, named Kabaji, had been killed by the pirate hunter, who had hunted them for weeks, relentlessly, and as a way to avenge his brother, Buggy's henchmen kept spinning Zoro around and trying to hit certain parts of his body, including his head. The scene cuts to Koby being called in by Gaara to a room. Then the Vice Admiral asked whether the boy was a friend of one of the pirates who had attacked the base, having been spotted with one of them. In the end, the boy explained that he had been saved by Luffy. When questioned about his involvement in the situation, Koby said he had the dream of joining the Marines, and that he had told that to the Straw Hat. As a final question, Gaara asked whether the two owed loyalty to each other, and the answer was that pirates should bow before justice. The man agreed and said the two of them would find the rubber pirate together. Then we return to the past. Makino was worried about Luffy's lack of appetite until the men who had caused trouble earlier arrived. Upon remembering that they had mocked Shanks, the boy became furious and told them to leave, since they were not welcome there. One of them lifted the child and told him to respect his superiors. Shanks arrived and told them to let Luffy go. Since that didn't happen, a battle broke out. The Redhead's crew members defeated everyone, but there was a catch. Where was the boy? But the scene cuts to the present day, in which the rubber pirate was trapped inside a capsule that was steadily filling with water. The audience watched the scene in horror as Buggy demanded the map. Luffy said he would not hand it over and that his friends would save him. Buggy laughed, saying that the others had abandoned him and that the Straw Hat was among the outcasts. But again he told the boy to join him, for once he found the map, he would be the king of the pirates and everyone would love him. Luffy replied that the enemy could not force anyone to love him, and with that, the capsule began filling at an even faster rate. And once again, we return to the past, where the boy is in a small boat with the man who had kidnapped him. At first, the child said Shanks would come for him, but then began to have doubts, especially after the kidnapper told him none of the pirates would miss him. Shortly after, the two were knocked overboard by a sea creature. And so, the scenes cut between the two versions of Luffy, present and childhood, drowning at different moments. In the past, however, he was saved by Shanks. The creature appeared again to attack them, but the redhead used the power he possessed to drive it away. For a moment, the boy felt guilty when he saw that the captain had lost one of his arms. But when Shanks reassured him that everything was fine, he apologized and the two embraced, very emotionally. Back in the present, Luffy continued to drown, asking the villain not to touch his hat. Meanwhile, Zoro was still held captive by Buggy's henchmen, who kept throwing knives until they hit their mark. The pirate hunter said he would get out of there because he had something better to do, since Luffy had changed his perception. Afterward, Zoro asked the enemy not to look behind him, but that request was not honored. With that, the man was struck by Nami, and Zoro simply finished the job. Then the two left to find Luffy. It didn't take long for them to locate him. However, when the boy was freed from the capsule, he ended up vomiting the map. Being more focused on getting his hat back, Buggy took advantage of the distraction to grab the map. The pirate hunter and the redhead still tried to get it back, but how do you fight someone who was already in pieces? And so the two ended up severely injured. Furious, Luffy ended up repeating a phrase familiar from Shanks in the past, saying he could attack him all they wanted, but not to touch his friends. And so the Straw Hat entered into a fight with Buggy, until at one point, Luffy realized he could throw the enemy's body parts inside boxes, which would be locked up, and warned Nami to help him. Zoro also understood the plan and contributed to it. After locking up all the parts and leaving only the head, the Straw Hat hit the clown with such force that his head, the only part left in the end, flew off to a very distant place. With the battle over, Luffy handed the map to Nami, but before they left, he freed all the villagers who were Buggy's prisoners. The scene cuts to Garb addressing the Marine members, saying he was going to take everyone there on a mission to eliminate those who had invaded the base, and to show other pirates that there would be consequences should they cross the Marines' path. Meanwhile, Luffy, Nami, and Zoro were departing from where they were, heading toward the Grand Line to find the One Piece. And the scene returns to the past, where Shanks was saying farewell to everyone and heading out after Gold Roger's treasure. But first, the captain went to talk to the boy. Luffy confessed that he wasn't ready yet, but that when he was, he would become a pirate, put together a crew better than Shanks's, and fulfill the dream of finding the One Piece and becoming the king of the pirates. Upon hearing that, the redhead ended up handing the boy his own straw hat, declaring it was the most precious thing he owned. He also asked Luffy to return it when they saw each other again, once he had become the king of the pirates. Back in the present, Nami fixed the straw hat, making the rubber pirate very happy. Afterward, Zoro asked if this sort of madness was going to happen every day. In response, Luffy said that Shanks had told him that when the path is too easy, it's because it isn't the right one. Zoro was a little pensive but admitted that the redhead seemed like a good person. That made the Straw Hat smile. The episode ends with Luffy saying the next stop was the Grand Line, and with Nami going below deck to inform someone who had the map about it. In Syrup Village, 7 years earlier, a little boy would ring the church bells every day, saying that pirates were coming. At first, the villagers would be very frightened, but then they began to realize it was nothing but a lie. The boy grew into a young man, and we discover his name is Usopp, and he was still raising false alarms about the supposed enemy's arrival. Meanwhile, Nami was analyzing the map to the Grand Line, when Luffy showed her the flag he had made. She said she would not let him hang that on her ship. When the Straw Hat showed it to Zoro, he said it was original. Then the pirate hunter said there was a leak on the ship. Nami went to check and saw that water was getting in. Some of her belongings were all wet, including the small animal she used to contact the unknown person from the call seen in the previous episode. With that, Luffy suggested they get a new ship, but didn't know where. Looking at the map, the redhead checked that the nearest place would be on Gecko Island. The three would be able to get there before they sank, and so they headed in that direction. The scene cuts to a ship where we see Garp and all the new Marine members sailing. Once more, the Vice Admiral gave a speech about putting an end to the pirates who had attacked the base earlier. Then, Kamui was reinforcing a knot that Morgan's son had made. The blonde tried to belittle the boy, especially in Garp's presence, who asked who had done the reinforcement. After Kamui confirmed it had been him, the Vice Admiral was quite impressed and invited him to take on other activities right away, since he was more experienced than the others. Then we see Luffy, Zoro, and Nami arriving in Syrup Village with the intention of finding a new ship. There we see the pirate hunter upset upon discovering that Buggy was worth quite a lot of money. In addition, the redhead asked the Straw Hat to push the sailboat into the sea, since that way they wouldn't be tracked. The next scene shows Buggy reassembling his body parts to put himself back together. Shortly after, a man with a peculiar appearance arrived to inform him that Arlong wanted to speak with the pirate, who replied he didn't accept requests. He then attacked the visitor, who managed to knock him out with ease. Meanwhile, the trio kept searching for a ship. Luffy had the idea of trying to convince a vendor. Nami and Zoro were waiting for a gap in security to steal one, without any flaw. Since they had different ideas about how to get new transportation, each went in a different direction, and after walking a bit, the Straw Hat was dazzled by what he found. But shortly after, he discovered it was not for sale. Usopp, who was talking to Luffy about the ship, said his best friend owned the entire shipyard and that he could try to negotiate a sale. The Straw Hat was very excited, and Nami agreed it wouldn't be a bad idea to talk to the woman. Then we see Koby being called in by Garp again. The two began to talk about the boy's experiences during the time he had spent with Alvida, and after finding the board, they began to play a game. Then we return to Syrup Village, where we see Usopp taking the trio to Kaya's house, his supposed friend and the owner of the shipyards. Nami and Zoro thought he was a fraud, but didn't mind as long as the young man got them inside the estate. However, one of the household staff, upon seeing Usopp, threw a knife at him, saying he was not welcome there. But Kaya arrived at the scene, happy to see the young man. He introduced the trio as his crew. The girl, happy about it, decided to invite everyone to dinner. After all, it was her birthday and she liked the idea of having guests, even convincing the butler, Klahadore, to accept. And so the four were sent to the guest room to shower and get ready for the evening meal. Before getting ready, Usopp used the servant's entrance to go to Kaya's room, intending to give her her birthday present. Upon opening it, she didn't seem very impressed until she heard the supposed story of how her friend had obtained the giant pearl. In the middle of the conversation, however, Kaya began coughing a great deal. Usopp asked how she was, and the woman replied she was getting used to being a sick person, since she had been in that state for quite some time. But she also said that in addition to the tea, Usopp's stories made her feel better. The scene cuts to Luffy and Nami in what appeared to be a giant walk-in closet. The redhead was trying on some dresses to wear to dinner. Zoro arrived and asked the others whether they also found the butler familiar. They didn't pay much attention to the fact, as Luffy was thinking about how to get the ship, and Nami said that rich people didn't have many emotions and would also end up with less money if they gave any possession away to someone. Until the Straw Hat asked the redhead if she wanted to make a bet. He said he could convince Kaya to give the ship to the trio. But if that didn't happen, they would go with Nami's plan of stealing the ship and fleeing, and the deal was made. Shortly after, the scene shifts to Klahadore and Kaya talking in her room. The butler said he felt very happy to repay everything that the girl and her parents had done for him, as well as being glad to serve her over the past 3 years. She hugged him and said she didn't know how to return everything he was doing for her. Then Klahadore said he knew he was overprotective of the young woman, out of fear that something might happen, and so he said he would make it up to her a little with the birthday present, and by relaxing a bit. Then he went to the kitchen to check that everything was perfect for the birthday, and ended up being very rude to the staff working in the house, especially to Sham. Afterward, we see Koby and Garp still playing. The Vice Admiral noticed the boy was too worried about not losing and always played defensively, so he set a time limit to test him. To Koby's own surprise, he won the game. Garp said it happened because that time the cadet had acted with resolve, and that was how he would need to act against pirates because, according to the man, it was the same thing. After the explanation, the two started a new match. In Syrup Village, the party was underway. Several guests were present, including the trio. Luffy was eating every dish that appeared, guided by Usopp, who made a point of introducing everyone to him. Zoro had a drink and shortly after sat down, and Nami was talking with Mary, the man who managed the family's finances, saying she would love to learn more about the subject. However, the conversations and activities were interrupted by the arrival of the birthday girl. As she came down the stairs, she praised the dress the redhead was wearing, and in fact, it was one of her late mother's favorites. From a corner, Zoro questioned Klahadore whether they had met before, but the butler replied that they had not, and that he would never frequent places like the Funky Bar, which the pirate hunter had mentioned. Mary ended up pulling Kaya aside to talk about business, but was quickly interrupted by Klahadore, saying that tonight was a night of celebration. The butler then led all the guests to the dining room. Usopp reminded Luffy to talk to the girl about the ships. She said that Mary was the one who handled that side of things since her parents had passed away, but that from midnight onward, she would become the sole owner of the business. Excited, the Straw Hat explained that they were pirates and recounted everything they had done up until now. Then he climbed on the table and told everyone what his dream was, to find the One Piece and become the king of the pirates. Afterward, he went to the girl to ask for the ship. But everything was interrupted by Klahadora, who was not at all pleased with what he was seeing, and asked for all of Usopp's riffraff to leave. Despite her cough, Kaya asked them to stay the night, since it was already late. Shortly after, she was taken by the butler to her room. The scene shifts to Koby and Garp playing once more, until Morgan's son entered the scene, saying they had found the wreckage of a sailboat, including a flag. The vice admiral realized the group would be nearby, and then asked the cadets which was the nearest island. Koby replied that it was Gecko Island, and so the man ordered them to row to the coast and promoted the bespectacled boy to a higher rank. Then we see Mary waiting for Kaya to discuss business. Klahadore appeared quietly, and the two began to talk. The financial officer didn't think it was a good idea to transfer the shipbuilding company, which had been in Kaya's family for years, into the butler's name. Klahadore tried to convince him that this was the girl's wish, but in vain. Suddenly, he began moving from one side to the other at a surprising speed until he killed Mary with iron claws. Then we see Buggy, who had been captured, inside a circus. All of a sudden, Arlong entered the scene and began holding the clown pirate accountable for everything he had been up to. To distract Arlong, Buggy mentioned Luffy, saying he was a rubber pirate who was after the One Piece. With that, the clown pirate said that if Arlong let him live, the two could find the boy together. Meanwhile, Luffy was walking through the house in the middle of the night, looking for food, and ended up bumping into Zoro, who claimed to be thirsty and in need of a drink. As soon as they stepped out, Nami appeared in the corridor and began stealing some very valuable objects, but by accident ended up entering Kaya's room. The two began to talk and covered many topics, until the girl said she considered the redhead a friend because Usopp knew her. Then the cough came again, and Nami showed some concern, but Kaya asked her not to treat her as a fragile person, and the other agreed. Then we see Usopp in the kitchen, with Luffy arriving alongside Zoro, who began rummaging around the place. Afterward, the three began talking about the adventures the Straw Hat had been through. Usopp said he would very much like to go after the One Piece, but that he couldn't leave Kaya. The scenes alternated between the boys and the girls, who continued talking in the bedroom and were growing even closer, until we returned to the kitchen, where Luffy was impressed by Usopp's marksmanship, who revealed he had learned everything from his father Usopp. The Straw Hat was shocked because he knew the boy's father. After all, the man was a member of Shanks' crew. In addition, the rubber pirate emphasized how full of wisdom Usopp was. Zoro said he needed a drink, and Usopp guided him to the cellar, while Luffy decided to stay and have some soup from the kitchen. While looking for something good in the wine cellar, Usopp ended up tripping over Mary's body and was frantic. The pirate hunter noticed there were 5 blades and confirmed he had seen those before. Klahadore and another kitchen staff member appeared. Then Zoro revealed that Klahadore's real name was actually Captain Kuro, captain of the Black Cat Pirates. In theory, he was supposed to be dead by Morgan's hand, axe hand, but the man confessed it was all a ruse. The two entered into a battle, but Kuro was too fast and no one could keep up with him, until the pirate went after Usopp. But before Zoro could attack, he was struck with a bottle by Sham, the kitchen staff member. Usopp managed to escape because he knew every corner of the house. Meanwhile, Kuro asked his 2 servants to dispose of the bodies there, taking them outside without leaving any trace. The scene cuts to Kaya inviting Nami and the rest of the group for breakfast and to negotiate about the caravel. Before leaving the girl's room, the redhead told Kaya not to let Klahadore or anyone else control her, since she was stronger than she thought. Upon leaving the room, Nami returned the items she had stolen earlier to their places. Then we see Kuro's 2 henchmen throw Mary and Zoro into a well. The next scene showed Usopp shouting that there were pirates in the area. One of the neighbors said he was tired of that story, leaving the young man dejected on the ground. Back in the past, we see the same neighbor taking young Usopp to his mother, asking her to discipline her son. Bankina, who was bedridden, asked the boy to stop screaming about pirates, but the child insisted they were really coming, including his father Usopp. Shortly after, the woman passed away before she could finish her conversation with her son. Back in the present, Usopp remained dejected on the sidewalk, questioning why no one believed him. But then, at the end of the episode, there is a surprise. Koby appeared in front of the young man, saying he believed him. With that, we can conclude that the Marines had already arrived in town and were going after Luffy, Zoro, and Nami. Zoro waking up after some time, realizing he was trapped in a well beside Mary's body. The scene cuts to Usopp telling Koby and other cadets that Kuro captain of the Black Cat Pirates, was somewhere in town, as well as explaining that Luffy was also in danger. Upon hearing about his old friend, Koby promptly said the Marine members would help, and asked Usopp to lead the way. At the mansion, Nami went to the kitchen and realized the Straw Hat was unconscious, and figured out it happened right after the boy drank Kaya's soup. Upon realizing that someone was approaching, the redhead decided to hide in the pot cabinet to find out what was going on. Shortly after, Klahadore entered the kitchen with 2 of his crew members, and they assumed the boy had died from the amount of tea he had ingested. And so the captain asked his 2 servants to throw Luffy's body into the well, just as they had done with Zoro and Mary. Then we see Usopp, Koby, Morgan's son, and 2 other Marine members ringing the doorbell of the mansion. Koby said the Marine members had heard rumors about pirates in the area, and Usopp immediately shouted that the butler, who was standing in front of them, was the pirate. Klahadore claimed the young man had always had trouble with lying, and that things had only gotten worse since his mother's death. Irritated by the butler's words, Usopp asked them to check the man's hands, which contained blades. Koby saw there was nothing there, and Morgan's son grew angry at the waste of time. With that, he told Klahadore they were looking for Luffy. Realizing he could get the Marines out of the way, Klahadore said the Straw Hat was in the custody of the servants, and using the mansion's telephone, asked them to bring the Straw Hat to the door. Surprised by the Marines' visit, the 2 decided to obey the captain and brought the boy to the door. Before they arrived, the scene shows Usopp telling Koby that Luffy was a different kind of pirate from Kuro, and that Kaya was in danger. But without evidence, the cadet couldn't do anything to help. After handing Luffy over to the Marine members, Klahadore was closing the mansion's doors, but Koby said he still wanted to ask the butler a few questions. In the kitchen, Nami took advantage of the fact that Sham was distracted and hit the crew member over the head with a pot. Upon hearing the noise from inside, Koby asked Klahadore what it was, but the butler quickly changed the subject and dismissed everyone there, since they had already found who they were looking for. Usopp still tried to warn them about the man's lies, but in vain, and so the young man ran off asking for help, while the disguised pirate closed the doors of the estate. Meanwhile, Zoro kept trying to escape from the well at all costs. But in the middle of that, we return to his past, in Shimotsuki village, 7 years earlier. The scene shows 2 people fighting each other, repeatedly. One of them is Zoro, who ended up being defeated by his opponent. While leaving the location, a young woman named Quina, whom he had been fighting, came after him, saying the boy had lowered his elbow and stated that it was friendly advice. Despite Quina wanting to help him, he didn't listen and only said that beyond being the second best among everyone present, he couldn't beat her because of the bamboo swords. In addition, Zoro stressed that one day he would beat her. With that, the girl decided they would fight with real swords and said that when that day came, the young man would have to be ready to kill her too. Back in the present, Zoro tried to escape once more, but in vain, and so he decided to move on to plan B. Meanwhile, Usopp went to Kaya's bedroom window to try to speak with her. The young woman, who was asleep, woke up not understanding the young man's presence there, but let him in. Then he began to talk about the presence of pirates in the mansion, about Klahadore wanting to hurt her, and that Mary had been killed by the butler, who was actually a dangerous pirate. Kaya refused to believe him, since Klahadore had always done everything for her. With that, she ended up slapping Usopp across the face and asked her friend to leave. But to her surprise, he refused and said he would stay there until he was sure the girl would be safe. In the kitchen, Sham woke up and was quickly attended to by Buchi. She recounted that Nami had been hiding and listening to everything, and then had knocked her out with a pot. Klahadore was irritated that the crew member had let the redhead escape, but as soon as they heard the clock chiming, they set that aside and decided to put the plan into action, reveal their true identities and kill Kaya. So that there would be no impediment whatsoever, Klahadore had his 2 servants lock down the house. Buchi activated the security barriers, which greatly surprised Kaya, since her parents had installed those against pirate invasions. For a moment, the 2 thought the bedroom door was being forced open by the enemies. But when it opened, they saw it was Nami, relieved to see both of them were alive. The redhead recounted what she had overheard. At first, Kaya thought Usopp had sent Nami to say all of that, but he quickly said he hadn't known the friend was being poisoned, and even blamed himself for having served the tea to her. Then Nami tried to make the young woman think about when she had first started getting sick, whether it hadn't been right from when they hired Klahadore, and said that the 3 of them needed to get out of there, because otherwise they would die. The scene cuts to Klahadore walking up to Kaya's room and calling for the girl, but upon breaking down the door, he realized no one was there. Then we see her together with Nami and Usopp, who who was guiding the two through a very hidden corridor in the mansion, since he knew every corner of the place. Then the scene alternated between Klahadore, scratching the walls of the house, while the three walked in search of the east wing. However, Kaya began to cough, and the butler heard it. With that, he used his blades to try to hit them, but without success. Meanwhile, Zoro was trying to climb out of the well. As he attempted to climb, it showed a memory of him fighting Kamuina, but this time both were using real swords, and so the scenes alternated between past and present, until Zoro ended up falling into the well again, and was also defeated by Kamuina. The two began to talk, and even though the boy had already convinced himself that he would never defeat his opponent, she stated that one day he would become stronger, more agile and faster, just like the other boys, and so he would beat her. Kuina explained that over time, men gained strength, agility, and speed, and with that, women would no longer be able to defeat them. Zoro told her not to make excuses and suggested they train every day until one of them became better. Then the two ended up swearing to keep that promise, with the goal that one day one of them would become the greatest swordsman of all time. Back in the present, we see the Marine members carrying Luffy. Koby admitted he found Klahadore strange, but Morgan's son didn't understand why the boy was not satisfied. The two began to argue until the Straw Hat whispered the word meat. With that, Morgan's son decided to get closer, and Luffy ended up vomiting all the tea onto the cadet's clothes. In the mansion, Kaya, Nami, and Usopp reached the East Wing room. The young woman was distraught at not having realized that Klahadore was a villain, but the redhead, in addition to stressing that it wasn't Kaya's fault, asked her to be strong while they tried to get out of the place. Then the three faced the portrait of the girl's parents, who kept asking herself what they would think of her and whether they were disappointed. But again, Nami stepped in, saying that Kaya's parents' wish was precisely their daughter's survival, and so the three turned the helm together. That made Klahadore notice movement in the house, and he went in another direction to find them. Still in the well, Zoro got back up after falling during the climb. Then the scene cuts to the past, in which he was waiting for Kuina. However, his sensei appeared at the location to communicate that the young woman had suffered an accident and had unfortunately died. The boy couldn't accept the news and even said they had made a promise, but was comforted by the teacher. Back in the present, the pirate hunter repeated the phrase, "We made a promise," and began to climb again. The images alternated between present and past once more, with Zoro trying to escape the well and Kuina's funeral. During the wake, he asked for permission to use his friend's sword, and recounted that the two had promised that one of them would become the greatest swordsman of all time. Upon hearing that, the sensei said it would fall to him to keep those words, both for his own sake and for his friends. The memory was the fuel that allowed the present-day Zoro to finally escape from the well. Then we see Luffy vomit the rest of the team, and be surprised to see Koby beside him. The Straw Hat said he needed to return to the mansion, since Klahadore was going to kill Kaya, and then come after the crew afterward. Koby said he had orders to arrest his friend, who quickly asked whether he didn't want to help innocent people, claiming that Kaya was one of those people. Fed up with all that talk, Helmeppo pointed his gun at the two of them. But before he could fire, Zoro appeared and knocked him out with a punch. Luffy was very surprised to see the swordsman, and the two walked in the direction of the mansion. However, Kami ordered them to stop, saying both were under arrest by order of the Marines. Luffy immediately turned around and replied that although he understood his friend had orders to follow, he was going back to help his friends, and also made it clear not to try to stop him. Kami remained incredulous and shortly after nodded his head, watching the two disappear. Back at the mansion, Nami, Usopp, and Kaya tried to turn the helm but couldn't because they weren't strong enough, until they heard Klahadore's voice and decided to hide. Upon entering the room, the captain walked slowly through the space, looking for Kaya, using his blades to slash through the bed sheets, smash a few statues, and cut the furniture, while also uttering terrible words about the young woman. Meanwhile, Luffy and Zoro arrived at the mansion and decided to split up. Walking through the corridor, the pirate hunter sensed someone's presence and went after it. The scene cuts to the captain speaking about Kaya, who decided to attack him. Nami tried to stop her, but shortly after, decided to go along. Both were caught by the captain, but Usopp used his slingshot to help them. Then the villain went after him looking for a fight. Afterward, we see Zoro finding Buchi in another room of the mansion. The two entered into a battle, and Sham arrived to help her teammate. And even with 2 against 1, the swordsman was gaining the upper hand. The scene returns to the room, where we see Klahadore pointing his blades at Kaya, attempting to kill her. But Luffy arrived and grabbed him with his elastic arms. The Straw Hat told the enemy not to touch his friends, and the two entered into a battle with exchanges. while Nami and Kaya went to help Usopp. Then Klahadore began to speak about life as a pirate, and also the concerns he had accumulated over the years, as well as becoming a major target in East Blue. He tried to convince Luffy that everyone sneered at and belittled him, even his own crew. Then the scene cuts to Zoro fighting Buchi and Sham. Despite having the upper hand, he ended up losing one of his swords, the most important one, because it had belonged to Koina, to the female opponent, who threw the object against the wall. Then we return to the room, with Luffy countering all of Klahadore's negative remarks about a pirate's life. Using his concentration and hearing, Luffy managed to locate the enemy and land a punch on him. Surprised by what had happened, Klahadore prepared to attack. Meanwhile, Zoro managed to knock down his opponents and recover the sword that was embedded in the wall. But shortly after, the two got back up and went to fight again. The scene cuts to the captain and the Straw Hat facing each other, and after managing to separate the blades using his rubber arms, Luffy uttered the words "Gum Gum Bell" and struck the man with an elastic headbutt. Everyone was quite surprised, especially Usopp, who was in awe of everything he had just witnessed. While everyone was descending the mansion stairs, Zoro had managed to defeat Kuro's 2 crew members. Nami warned the group that the Marines knew where they were and that they needed to get out as quickly as possible. However, Luffy asked her how they would do that, since they had no ship, until Kaya corrected him, saying they did in fact have a ship. Upon hearing the statement, Luffy immediately looked at Nami, since he had won the bet they had made earlier. The scene cuts to everyone standing before the ship, chosen by the rubber pirate. The young woman recounted that Mary was the one who had managed the shipyard after the death of her parents. As a way of honoring him, the protagonist named the ship the Going Merry, and shortly after celebrated the achievement. Suddenly, Luffy noticed how enchanted Usopp was by the ship and invited him to join the crew, especially after witnessing the great marksmanship the young man had displayed. At first, he refused because he didn't want to leave Kaya alone, but the girl quickly convinced him to follow his dream. In addition, she emphasized that one day the two would meet again so that Usopp could tell her about his adventures at sea. Then the two shared a kiss as a farewell. The scene cuts to the Going Merry heading toward the sun, with each crew member doing something on the ship. Nami handling one part, Zoro lying in a hammock, Usopp hunting for something to eat, and Luffy at the top of the ship shouting, overjoyed at having gotten what he wanted. Shortly after, we discovered that Kuro was alive and had used a small boat to escape the town. Then the scene cuts to Koby apologizing to Garp for failing to capture Luffy and for failing in his first mission. But the Vice Admiral showed him the Going Merry, saying the boy had driven off the pirates, emphasizing that yes, the mission had been completed. Back on the ship, Usopp showed the flag he had made for the vessel, and the Straw Hat stressed that he was the captain. The two entered into a small argument that made Nami and Zoro laugh. But the moment of joy didn't last long, as the Marines began firing at them. Luffy ended up going to see who was behind it, calling out Gramps and leaving the rest of the crew confused, the Going Merry under attack by the Marines. Zoro asked whether Luffy had called Garp Grandpa, and shortly after, we understand why. The next scene shows the Straw Hat as a child, putting together a small boat. Suddenly, Garp appeared and asked the boy why he was wasting his time with that. But then comes the answer. Luffy said he was actually a pirate. With that, the Vice Admiral destroyed everything the boy had built and picked him up, saying he would train him to join the Marines, even though that wasn't the child's wish. Back in the present, several cannonballs hit the Going Merry. While all the crew members were thinking about fleeing, Luffy said he would attack the enemy's back. However, with the exception of Nami, no one knew how to operate the ship or use the cannon. Then Garp ordered them to stop attacking, since he wanted all the pirates alive, and asked the crew to surrender. However, the Straw Hat responded loud and clear, never. Out of patience, the Vice Admiral grabbed a cannonball and hurled it toward the Going Merry. But using his rubber abilities, the rubber pirate stopped the ship from being hit and sent it right back, striking the Marine vessel. With that, the sail began falling toward Helmeppo, who was saved by Koby. Then we see both Garp and the crew amazed at how Luffy had countered the Marine attack. With that, they managed to escape. Sometime later, Nami asked about the condition of the ship, and Zoro said it could be worse. The redhead also stressed that the crew needed a place to hide before the Marines brought in reinforcements, but that because of the fog, she couldn't see anywhere on the map. But when the swordsman said it might be better to ask the captain about that, Usopp replied that Luffy hadn't left the bow since the moment they escaped. Nami then suggested that someone go ask him about it, and also bring up the fact that the young man had called Garp grandfather. For that reason, the redhead suggested Zoro go speak with Luffy, since he was the first to join the crew. Despite not seeming very pleased about it, the swordsman agreed and went to the Straw Hat. The conversation didn't last long, since Luffy didn't want to talk about the battle, and Zoro concluded that everything was fine. Nami even questioned whether the pirate hunter had actually asked anything, but before they could continue the conversation, the rubber pirate asked whether his crewmates were smelling food. No one understood what was happening, and Usopp even suggested they should find a place. But confident in what he was sensing, Luffy tried to give Nami some coordinates so she could steer the ship in the direction where the food smell was coming from. Until Zoro spotted land first, and shortly after, Usopp wondering what a bartadu was. After stopping the Going Merry alongside the enormous vessel, they discovered it was a restaurant. With that, the Straw Hat said everyone should go eat. Upon entering the establishment, they discovered they needed a reservation since it was packed with vacancies only in 3 weeks' time. But thanks to Nami, who bribed the staff member, the crew secured a table, even though Usopp thought it was because of him. After they settled in, the scene cuts to a blonde man preparing a dish. Another staff member entered the kitchen saying the orders were piling up and that he hadn't seen that dish on the menu. The other replied that the sauce needed to cool and that imagination was also important. Even with the staff member quite irritated, the blonde man was still taking everything in stride until the head chef arrived and said it wasn't a dish the restaurant served, ordering him to attend to the customers instead of cooking. In the dining room, two pirates were arguing, and the blonde man arrived to intervene, saying that one of the rules, in addition to not wasting food, was not to fight on the premises. One of the pirates, who wore an eye patch, said he agreed to stop, as long as the other apologized, but the other one with pink hair refused and even raised his gun. As a way of preventing the fight from escalating, the blonde man struck the two of them while holding a tray. After knocking the men down, he reassured the rest of the customers and went to Luffy's table, introducing himself as Sanji and asking how he could help them. At first, he seemed quite irritated due to what had happened in the kitchen and was not inclined to serve the crew until he saw Nami and became very eager to bring her order to the table. Well, more specifically hers. After Sanji walked away, everyone began to joke that the redhead had found herself a boyfriend, laughing at the situation. Zoro even imitated him. The scene cuts to the Marine cadets repairing the ship's damage. Koby told Garp that the 77th Division was training nearby as a way of requesting help, but the Vice Admiral refused, saying they could handle the problem themselves. Upon boarding the ship, Garp called Dracule Mihawk, who was in the middle of a fight, to hire him to go after Luffy. Mihawk is a well-known pirate recognized as a powerful swordsman, and he promptly replied that it would not be a difficult task. The Vice Admiral, however, told him not to underestimate the Straw Hat, as he was a very unpredictable young man. But before they could continue the conversation, Don Krieg, another well-known pirate, arrived at the location where the battle was taking place. With that, the two entered into a brief confrontation, from which Krieg came out dead. And so the pirate returned to his conversation with Garp, who instructed the ally to head to East Blue, to the Sambas region. He also demanded that Luffy be captured alive. Back at the restaurant, everyone was full from eating so much. Shortly after, Luffy proposed a toast to the crew and their victory against the Marines. Nami was shocked to see that the boy considered that something good, and soon after mentioned the fact that he had called Gaara Grandpa. Zoro pointed out that she had also robbed the Marine base, but the redhead replied that no one would have noticed if it hadn't been for Luffy. With that, the rubber pirate responded that, while it wasn't great to have enemies on their trail, the crew had shown in the previous fight that they wouldn't be easy to take down. Before they could continue the conversation, the owner walked into the dining room, asking who Luffy was. He then went to the table and said the food hadn't been paid for. The boy replied that it had been paid for, he just hadn't used the money yet, and asked for it to be put on his tab, because when he became king of the pirates and found the One Piece, he would come back and pay for everything with interest. The owner obviously wasn't pleased and took the Straw Hat hostage. As payment, Luffy would have to wash all the dishes. Shortly after, Sanji returned and said that if he wasn't allowed to cook again, he wouldn't be a waiter at the restaurant either. And after a brief argument, he left the place. At night, outside the Baratie, Nami, Zoro, and Usopp were sitting at a table. The redhead asked the others if they didn't think it was wrong that Luffy hadn't told them about Gaara. But the swordsman said they were making many enemies along the way, so the Vice Admiral was just one more. Nami said he didn't understand and almost revealed her secret. But to change the subject, she went to the bar to buy a drink. She also asked the bartender who she needed to speak to if she wanted passage to the Konomi Islands. A man appeared beside the redhead, offering 6,000 for the trip, and asked if the others would be coming too. After stating she would be going alone, he told her he was at Dock 22 and that they would depart at dawn. Meanwhile, all the cadets were cleaning the marine ship. Helmeppo noticed that Koby was acting strange and decided to ask what was wrong. The young man said he thought Gaara was truly using him, and then asked his colleague if he had ever heard of Mihawk. Morgan's son replied that, besides being the world's greatest swordsman, he was also one of the 7 warlords of the sea, a group of extremely powerful pirates who caused discord wherever they went. Because of this, the government decided it would be better to keep them as allies, and made a cooperation agreement with them. The warlords would do the dirty work for the Marines, and in return would gain the freedom to do as they pleased. Upon hearing all of this, Koby was stunned, and Helmeppo declared that the boy didn't know how the world worked. At the Barati, Luffy and Sanji were talking in the kitchen. The young man said the dish was excellent, and asked the cook why Zeph didn't let him make other types of food, different from what was served at the restaurant. The blonde claimed it was jealousy. After a while, the Straw Hat assumed Sanji's dream was to manage the place, but soon discovered that it was actually to find the All Blue, a place that had all kinds of spices never before used, fish never before found, and countless ingredients. Upon hearing that, Luffy encouraged him to pursue that dream and not let the stubborn old man stand in the way. But before he could continue, a man entered the kitchen asking for help, as he was extremely hungry. After preparing a dish, the man thanked Sanji, saying he had saved him. Luffy said that besides being a great cook, the blonde was a really good person and should join his crew. At first, Sanji refused, but the Straw Hat insisted because he knew his friend wasn't happy at his job. When the rubber pirate mentioned the One Piece, the man stopped eating and said it was his goal as well, going on to say he was part of a massive crew, but had been the sole survivor among 5,000 other pirates. Finally, he asked Luffy to leave Gold Roger's treasure behind. Outside the Barati, while Usopp danced, Zoro and Nami talked. Noticing that his crewmate was carrying something on her shoulders, he challenged her. Whoever got something wrong about the other would have to take a drink. The two began talking about the lives they led, taking shots as they went. The scene cut to Garp having a meal, until Koby walked into his room. The boy confronted the Vice Admiral about Mihawk going after Luffy, saying that people should be protected according to the law. He added that if things weren't done the right way, maybe the Marines weren't for him. Upon hearing everything, Garp replied that he had also been naive when he joined the Marines, and that over the years he'd had to adapt because the world wasn't as simple as it seemed. He then asked if Koby could handle that burden. When the boy answered yes, he began to leave, until the Vice Admiral commented that the uniform was starting to fit him. Back at the Bara, Usopp, very drunk, began loudly recounting the crew's battle against the Marines to the people around him. What he didn't realize was that Mihawk was standing right beside him, listening to everything, and after asking a few questions, said he'd like to meet Captain Luffy. Not thinking the man was dangerous, Usopp took him to Nami and Zoro, saying the man could meet the whole crew. Upon arriving, Mihawk asked who Luffy was, and Zoro recognized him immediately. Shortly after, the bounty hunter said he had been following the pirate's career since childhood and challenged him to a duel to the death. Even though he had never heard of Zoro, Mihawk agreed and said that after defeating his opponent, he would go after Luffy. Usopp and Nami were quite surprised, and the redhead even questioned what her crewmate had gotten them into. In the kitchen, the Straw Hat was washing dishes when Zeph arrived. The boy then began to defend Sanji, saying the owner would never prevent the blonde from following his dream, and recounted how he had fed the starving crew. But before they could continue, Usopp burst into the kitchen, saying the crew was in trouble. In another part of the Borati, Nami explained the whole situation to Luffy. At first, the Straw Hat was against the idea of Zoro dueling Mihawk, but upon remembering the conversation they had in the courtyard of the Marine base, the boy replied that he couldn't stand in the way of anyone's dream. Nami remained worried and admitted that Zoro was the best swordsman she knew. But when the bounty hunter asked why she was so concerned, the redhead replied it was because the two of them had become friends. But the young woman ended up being countered, as he pointed out that Nami herself had said she had no friends. She then decided to leave. The following scenes show Usopp waking up with a hangover, Zoro preparing for the duel, Luffy at the top of the Going Merry at dawn, and Nami leaving for the Konomi Islands. Afterward, Luffy and Usopp accompanied Zoro to the location where the fight would take place. When they arrived, Mihawk was already waiting for his opponent, and was surprised to see that the straw hat was the package the Marines wanted so badly. Then the fight began. Mihawk had the upper hand for most of the duel, even with a very small blade. He also took advantage of his opponent's carelessness to strike him on the right side of his chest. After managing to hit Zoro, the swordsman asked why his opponent wouldn't give up. In response, the bounty hunter said that if he did, his dream would be lost. Admiring his opponent for that, Mihawk said he would use his larger blade to kill him. But don't think that frightened Zoro. After all, he grabbed his third sword, the one that had belonged to Koina, and prepared for a new bout. Unfortunately, Mihawk managed to destroy both of Zoro's swords, and because of that, the bounty hunter ended up losing the fight. With that, he asked the man to kill him with his sword. Honoring Zoro's request, Mihawk made a massive cut across his opponent's chest. Nami and Usopp were devastated, and Luffy rushed to his friend to help him. In the meantime, Mihawk asked what the boy's goal was, to which he replied to become king of the pirates. The villain was surprised by the answer and said it was a very dangerous path. Annoyed, the Straw Hat said he didn't care, and that was what he was going to do. With that, the swordsman remarked that the world needed unpredictable people. He then asked Zoro to grow stronger and seek him out, as it was too soon for him to die. And before long, he departed from the Baratai. Luffy said it wasn't yet time for his friend to go. Zoro asked if the Straw Hat would be disappointed if he failed to fulfill his dream of becoming the world's greatest swordsman. The rubber pirate replied that the bounty hunter would never let him down. Then Zoro raised Kuina's sword and declared he would never lose again. However, he let the katana fall and closed his eyes. Luffy screamed for him, while Usopp and Nami stood in shock with tears in their eyes. Luffy, Nami, and Usopp are carrying Zoro inside the ship. Laying him on a table, they begin looking for a first aid kit, and the Straw Hat even fell into a daze for a few moments, until the redhead asked him to go back to the Baratie to find a doctor. The scene cut to Sanji cooking, until the moment his boss arrived and told him he had been demoted to waiter. The blonde said one of the cooks had a hangover, so he left it up to the man to decide whether he wanted to handle brunch all by himself or not. So the two of them began preparing the dishes together. Luffy burst into the kitchen crying for help, explaining that Zoro was gravely injured and needed a doctor. Zeph said the medical professionals were on the Konomi Islands and it would take 2 days to get there. With that, Sanji offered to help, even though brunch wasn't yet ready. So the owner told his employee to grab some food and tools and accompany the Straw Hat to where Zoro was. Upon arriving, Nami was extremely unsettled since her friend needed a proper doctor. But before she could complain, the man questioned her. Did she want to save the swordsman or not? Zeph then began stitching up the bounty hunter's wounds, and on top of that, placed fish skin over his body to stop the bleeding and speed up skin regeneration. Seeing that Zoro had lost a lot of blood, the owner said the swordsman might be hovering between life and death. As a way of bringing him back, he suggested the group start telling stories to show the crew was with him. So the three of them laid him in bed and watched over him for a while. The scene cut to Mihawk sitting in Garp's quarters. When the Vice Admiral arrived, the swordsman suggested the two of them speak privately, since Koby was present. As soon as the boy was dismissed, though he stayed just outside listening through the door, Garp's first question was where Luffy was, and he was surprised to learn that his ally had let the boy go. The two got into an argument about order and the partners they kept. Then Mihawk declared that Luffy was very interesting, adding that Garp's grandson might find the One Piece. As soon as the pirate left, the Vice Admiral began throwing everything around and in every direction, thoroughly enraged by what he had heard. When Kabu decided to check what was happening, the man left and said he would eat dinner in the mess hall. Meanwhile, Sanji was cooking for the entire crew, drawing praise from Usopp, who said how wonderful the smell was. Noticing that the Straw Hat was quiet, the blonde asked if something was wrong and whether he didn't like fish. Luffy replied that he had decided to get Zoro's sword ready for when his friend woke up. Usopp reminded him that the swordsman's injuries were severe, and there was a chance he might not wake up at all. But Luffy replied that Zoro was the toughest guy he knew and wouldn't lose to some random lord. Concerned about the boy, Sanji offered to make a few dishes, but incredibly, the rubber pirate had his mind only on fixing the sword. He then asked the cook to prepare his friend's favorite food, rice balls, and if he could somehow put some beer inside them. Sanji said he could make any dish, he just needed to be asked. Shortly after, Luffy began listing what they could do for Zoro: feed him, let him rest, or offer him something to drink, like water or beer. Seeing the Straw Hat lost in thought, Sanji said being a captain was very hard work. and that Zeph always said that making decisions was what set a leader apart from the rest of the crew. Luffy was quite surprised to learn that the owner used to be a pirate and immediately wanted to know how Sanji had met him. With that, we're taken back 9 years earlier to the passenger ship Orbit in East Blue. The blonde was a child helping out in the ship's kitchen. The man beside him said the boy needed to hurry as they weren't going to be serving fancy food there. Sanji, who was trying to get the texture of the food just right, said that one day in the All Blue, he would serve that kind of dish. Everyone mocked the boy, and the cook next to him said that place didn't exist. But the conversation was interrupted by a shout declaring that pirates had invaded the ship. While everyone fled, the boy grabbed a knife and hid. Suddenly, Zeph entered the kitchen and recognized the dish that was there. Upon noticing something was missing, he added seasoning to improve the food. Then the boy came out from where he was hiding and tried to kill him with the knife, but was quickly disarmed. Zeph was surprised to see that the child had made the dish, but Sanji remained sharp, even more so after seeing his dish get seasoned. The two had a brief argument, and the pirate even considered killing the boy, until he heard Sanji talk about finding the All Blue. But before he could get any answers, the ceiling was caving in, and the ship sank shortly after. The next day, the boy woke up and saw Zeph, asking what had happened. The man replied that both ships had sunk, and all the crew members were dead, except for the two of them. They were both stranded on a rock in the middle of the sea, and decided to wait for help. Zeph gave a sack of food to Sanji and asked him not to eat everything, as there wasn't much. They argued again, but the child decided to obey the orders given to him. Days passed and no help came. On top of that, the little food that remained began to spoil. On the 25th day, at night, Sanji spotted a ship and shouted to get the crew's attention, but to no avail. After a month, he had no way of feeding himself, and time kept passing. On the 70th day, the boy was furious at having received a smaller amount of food, and decided to go to Zeph with the knife, looking for something to eat. When he opened the sack, he found nothing but valuables, and asked how the man had survived all that time. Within seconds, he saw that the pirate had eaten his own leg to keep from starving. On top of that, Sanji realized Zeph had given all the food to him, and asked why, since the two of them barely knew each other. The man began to say that he had searched his whole life for the All Blue, and that the place truly existed, but his time was running out. Since the two of them shared the same dream, even if Zeph couldn't find it himself, he ended up giving the food to Sanji, with the hope that one day the boy would fulfill the dream for both of them, and for that he needed to stay alive. Back in the present, the blonde asked Luffy and Usopp if they could imagine someone cutting off their own leg to keep another person alive. Without hesitation, the Straw Hat said yes. Sanji then concluded the story by saying that he and Zeph had been stranded on the rock for 85 days, stating that the owner could have let him die there, but acted like a captain and made a very difficult decision. Scene cut to Nami, reading a story to Zoro in the room. As she spoke, she had some difficulty finishing the sentences. When she finally finished the book, Luffy walked in at that very moment and made a guess about what he had overheard. The redhead said the message wasn't that, and the boy shot back that the story could hold many different meanings, but it was up to each person's interpretation. Nami then said that sometimes the people in charge needed to make hard decisions, and the Straw Hat questioned why everyone kept saying that. So the young woman stepped forward, saying that the rubber pirate could have saved his friend, and asked why he hadn't stopped the fight from happening. Luffy replied that he didn't think Zoro was going to lose. Nami said the boy could have persuaded the swordsman not to fight, and the crew's leader replied that he would never do that. The two began to argue, until the rubber pirate declared that he would do everything to save him, but also couldn't bring himself to get in the way of his friend's dream. But even though those words had some effect on the redhead, she remained firm in her belief that perhaps it wasn't everyone's place to follow their own dreams, and she left the room. With that, Luffy began to suspect something was wrong with the young woman. The scene cut to Koby tidying up Garp's mess, until the Vice Admiral himself walked in, apologizing for the disorder. He then asked if Koby knew the reason why. Even though the boy said he didn't, Gaara knew the young man had been listening through the door, and confirmed that Luffy was indeed his grandson, explaining that he had tried to train him for years, but the Straw Hat always disobeyed him. But unlike the Straw Hat, Koby was an excellent cadet, according to the Vice Admiral. Shortly after, the pink-haired boy said he knew Luffy's ways, knew that his friend didn't follow rules, and carved his own path, and also pointed out that the rubber pirate had always known who he truly was, and that wasn't going to change. Irritated upon hearing that, Gaara asked what he should do, and whether letting him run free was even an option. Koby asked him if that idea would be so bad. Suddenly, the Vice Admiral reflected, saying that perhaps he had been handling the situation the wrong way, and asked the cadet to gather the other Marine members on deck. We then see Arlong and two henchmen invading the Bharati. They kicked a young man out of his seat and sat down, until Zeph entered the dining room to find out what was going on. With that, the fishman said he was looking for Luffy. The owner claimed he wasn't familiar with the boy and offered the pirate any dish from the restaurant, free of charge. But Arlong wasn't convinced, and besides saying he already had food on his plate, said he wanted them to hand over the straw hat before he finished his meal. Otherwise, the people in the restaurant would be killed. Nami overheard everything and shortly after, slipped away. The next scene shows Usopp entering the room and asking Luffy how Zoro was doing. The two boys talked, and Usopp convinced his friend to tell the bounty hunter a story, following Zeph's advice. Even with his mind racing, the Straw Hat began to say a few words, but was interrupted by Nami screaming. When they found each other, she explained that Arlong and two henchmen were after him, and that everyone needed to flee. Sanji said he would go to the restaurant to see what was happening, and Luffy agreed to go with him. However, the redhead warned that the enemy was extremely dangerous and it would be better if they escaped as quickly as possible. But that wasn't enough to convince Luffy. After all, he said he was going to protect the restaurant. Sanji even asked why the boy would do that, since he wasn't involved in the fight. The Straw Hat replied that because the blonde had fed the whole crew, that was reason enough to stay. Again, Nami tried to warn him about how dangerous Arlong was and begged the rubber pirate to change his mind. But Luffy said he would not let innocent people die because of him. Before leaving, he asked the redhead to stay on the Going Merry to protect the map, saying it was safe with her. Meanwhile, Arlong was devouring the dish in front of him. But upon noticing the stares of the humans around him and the henchmen accompanying him, he began talking about how most fishermen would give anything to share a table with people or would seek equal treatment. But he himself believed that fishermen were superior in every way: speed, strength, and much more. However, before he could continue his speech, Luffy walked into the dining room, asking who Arlong was. When the enemy revealed himself, the Straw Hat made his way toward the pirate, alongside Usopp and Sanji. At first, the two exchanged taunts and mockery, until Arlong revealed who had helped him find Luffy. None other than Buggy. Well, at least part of him. And to the surprise of everyone present, the clown pirate had placed his ear inside the boy's hat. After Buggy's head returned to the bag, Arlong ordered the rubber pirate to hand over the map and bow before him. Luffy obviously refused, and also made it clear he wouldn't do any of that, since the fish man wasn't a king. He then said that if the enemy wanted the map, he'd have to fight for it, and so the fight began. The first to make a move was Zeph, who fired a shotgun blast at Arlong. However, one of the henchmen ended up hitting the owner, leaving him injured. Seeing the scene, Sanji delivered a flurry of kicks to the fishman, who unfortunately knocked the blonde down as well. Usopp was hiding under the table but crawled over to where the cook was to help him. Luffy prepared to punch Arlong, but the enemy was fast and grabbed him, then slammed him to the ground. The Straw Hat got up and tried to punch his opponent several times, but had no success. At one point, the pirate grabbed the boy's hands and pulled him close, saying he would make an example of him. With that, he ended up hurling Luffy outside the Bharati. Meanwhile, Nami was in the room, telling Zoro she didn't allow herself to have friends because she always ended up letting them down somehow. And with the map of the Grand Line in hand, she left the room. The scene returned to Luffy and Arlong's fight. At several points, the Straw Hat was knocked down, but always got back up and struck his opponent, until Nami appeared, saying she had gotten the map. She then revealed that she had never been part of Luffy's crew, because she had already been in Arlong's group for years, and the camera zoomed in on her tattoo, a saw shark. For a brief moment, the rubber pirate didn't believe it, but the redhead told him he only saw what he wanted to see. Shortly after, she told the crew to leave, since the map was in their hands. Arlong wanted to finish the fight with Luffy, but Nami said he wouldn't want to waste time on someone who had eaten a devil fruit, and to let the sea take care of that. So the fishman hurled the Straw Hat into the water. The boy struggled to surface but couldn't, and was nearly drowning until Sanji rescued him. Usopp also appeared shortly after to help them and comfort his friend over what had happened, since Luffy still didn't want to believe what the redhead had done. The scene cut to Garp lecturing the cadets, saying he was proud of their work in pursuing the pirates. He also said that Luffy and the crew had stopped being a mere nuisance and would never surrender. Therefore, the attacks would become more offensive, and they would capture everyone to hand them over to justice. Meanwhile, Zeph was cleaning the restaurant's dining room, and Sanji came to help him. The two got into an argument, as the owner wanted the blonde to go and seek out the all blue, but the cook insisted that the place couldn't function without him. Until, in a way that wasn't exactly friendly, Sanji and Zeph agreed it was the best decision. Afterward, we see Luffy entering the room and talking to Zoro about dinner, Usopp's stories, and the fight with Arlong's crew. He then lamented that he had lost the map, Nami, and might also lose the friend lying there in the bed, gravely injured. Finally, the boy said that before, he didn't know what to say, but in that moment, he only wanted to say how much he needed the bounty hunter to wake up. Well, it seems Luffy's thoughts reached him, because shortly after, Zoro finally woke up. The Straw Hats celebrated enormously, since everyone had thought the swordsman's chances of surviving were minimal. As he was beginning to regain consciousness, Zoro said he'd had a strange dream that Nami had left, but Luffy told him that had actually happened, and it was his fault. The bounty hunter said the Straw Hat was acting like a captain, and it wasn't his fault at all. Even though the rubber pirate disagreed because the crew was falling apart, the swordsman said it wasn't, and swore to stay by his friend's side until the end, until they found the One Piece or died trying, even with other pirates and the Marines coming after them. Usopp walked into the room shortly after, celebrating that Zoro was alive. The swordsman even let out a few laughs at that. Then the boy asked what they would do, chart a course for the Grand Line or go after the One Piece. Luffy replied that they couldn't do either of those things without the complete crew, and shortly after said they would go after Nami first. The next scene shows everyone making the last preparations on the Going Merry to set sail. To everyone's surprise, Sanji decided to come along. Zoro didn't seem very pleased with the new member on board, but didn't complain too much either for now. As the ship sailed, Zeph and Sanji said their goodbyes. At first, neither of them said much, but then the blonde made a point of saying just how important the owner had been to him over all those years. Both of them were quite moved, but deep down knew that this was what they had always wanted for each other. The episode ended with Usopp and Zoro asking how they would find Nami, since no one knew where she was. But Luffy said he knew someone who could provide that information. When everyone went below deck, the Straw Hat revealed Buggy's head. After all, he has eyes and ears everywhere, doesn't he? Usopp confused by Buggy's coordinates. The clown pirate had promised to take the whole crew to the Konomi Islands, where Nami was. Then Zoro appeared and said he didn't fully trust the clown pirate, as it could be another trick. He even grabbed the enemy's head and threatened to throw it into the sea. But Buggy insisted it was the truth, since everyone would want the map to the Grand Line back, and he his own body back. With no patience to deal with the clown pirate's whining, the bounty hunter tossed his head into a barrel. Meanwhile, Luffy and Sanji were in another part of the ship, fishing. The Straw Hat was still worried about his friend, only wanting to know whether she was alright. Sanji explained that a woman like Nami wouldn't align herself with Arlong's crew out of her own free will. Zoro arrived and claimed that her tattoo said otherwise. The two had a brief argument about what her motives might be, until Luffy stepped in saying Nami must have her reasons, and added that regardless of the choice his friend had made, he would want to hear the reason directly from her. Suddenly, Usopp shouted, "Land ahead," pointing forward, and there were the Konomi Islands. Shortly after, we returned to the past, showing young Nami playing with a girl, and then the two of them playing cards with a woman. However, the memory was interrupted by one of Arlong's crew members, saying it was the redhead's turn to make a bet. During the game, Nami mocked the henchman playing against her. The fishman even thought he would win the game, but was surprised to see that he had lost all the money he'd bet. Unable to accept it, he accused the redhead of being a liar and a cheat, and she replied that one of the crew's rules was to not lie about money. Shortly after, another crew member arrived, saying Arlong wanted to speak with Nami. On the way to where the captain was, we could see Buggy's body and even part of his circus. Upon entering a room, the navigator, as named by Luffy, found a map and began looking through it. Then we returned again to the past, 8 years earlier, in Kokoyashi village. Nami was looking at a book containing maps, but with the arrival of the other girl and the woman who had appeared before, she decided to try to hide what she was doing. But it didn't work very well, as she was quickly discovered. Then the red-haired woman asked the girl where she had gotten that book, and quickly found out the item had been stolen. The two got into an argument about not having much money and family, and Nami replied that, besides hating being poor, that Nojiko, the blue-haired girl, and the woman were not her sister or mother, respectively. With that, the girl ended up getting slapped and ran off, very upset by what had happened. While Nami was under a tree, we see the woman coming to the girl to say she had set aside a plate of food. After seeing that the girl was reluctant, she decided to tell a story. When she found Nami and Nojiko, the unit the red-haired woman was part of was facing a crew of pirates in the kingdom of Oka. Besides all the members getting separated, she was dying of hunger and thought she was going to die until she found the two of them still very young. From that point on, she wanted to take care of both of them and knew that decision was right. She then turned to the little redhead, saying that further down the road she would also know what was right. Back in the present, Nami's thoughts were interrupted by Arlong's arrival, who besides saying the room held many memories, claimed the redhead should be proud, because thanks to her, his crew had been able to identify all the marine bases from where they were to the Goa Kingdom. Even though the redhead argued that none of that belonged to her, the fishman said the crew member was a valuable asset to the crew, but since she had been away for so long, he thought the navigator wouldn't come back. Nami replied that she would come back because the two of them had a deal, and shortly after, handed the map to the captain. Arlong began talking about his plans, but the redhead always tried to warn him about something or challenge his belief that situations were simple to solve. After a while talking, Arlong told Nami that one of the villages still hadn't paid its tribute, which in this case was Kokoyashi village, the place where she had grown up. Upon hearing the name of the place, the redhead swallowed hard and said she wasn't welcome there, suggesting other locations for them to complete the mission. But the captain replied that this task required a human touch and then left the room. Meanwhile, the Marines entered the Bharati, saying they would like to speak with the owner. Zef arrived in the dining room, quite puzzled by the presence of everyone there, especially the Vice Admiral. He even remarked that they had missed the party. Garp began saying he wasn't there to arrest the owner, but rather that he would like information about Luffy's whereabouts. Zef said he couldn't remember as there were many customers, but one of the marine men asked whether he truly didn't remember or simply didn't want to say. Then the Vice Admiral said the wanted man was unforgettable and wore a straw hat. Again, Zef said he didn't know him, but offered everyone a free meal. Even with resistance from one of the crew members, Garp took an interest in the food and said he would love to eat a rare steak. The scene cut to Luffy and the others walking through a village on the Konomi Islands that was completely destroyed. Zoro remarked that he had never seen anything like it, and Usopp was so frightened that he wanted to go back to the ship. As they walked further ahead, they found a group of people and an official was saying they had no more time and no more money again, while a man and a woman who were at the front of the group asked if they still had time to get more money together. Nami suddenly appeared, answering that they didn't. Everyone was quite surprised by her appearance, and Luffy was about to go to his friend, but was held back by Zoro. Then Nojiko appeared and said her sister had some nerve showing up there, and angry went in the other direction. The redhead didn't seem too bothered and asked the guard if he had something for her. The same phrase had been repeated in the past, when the official asked young Nami if she had something for him, and with that, the girl handed him the historical Atlas of East Blue, apologizing and promising she would never steal again. But being an experienced man, the guard quickly noticed that the girl had crossed her fingers and automatically, whatever she had promised was invalid. With that, he said the little redhead wasn't a bad kid, but that she had done something unpleasant. But before she thought about doing something like that again, she should come find him first, swearing he could get her a small job. Suddenly, a young woman entered the village claiming pirates were coming. Arlong and his crew invaded the place, declaring the village would be his. Many residents were injured or killed, and several homes were destroyed. Back in the present, the guard handed the box of money to Nami, who said it was short. The man insisted, saying that was all they had, but she ordered him to get more. When everyone moved away, the redhead sensed Luffy's presence and immediately asked what he and the crew were doing there, as that was where she belonged. Surprised, the Straw Hat replied that he could ask her the same thing and said that wasn't her. Then Nami replied that she was just not the person he had hoped for. Luffy insisted, saying that if she needed help, well, he tried to finish the sentence, but the redhead cut him off, saying she didn't need any of them and that she had only tricked them to get the map and deliver it to Arlong. She also made it clear that she had never been part of the Straw Hat's idiotic crew. The rubber pirate couldn't believe it, but Nami told everyone to leave the area, saying she never wanted to see any of them again. But as she turned away, her eyes filled with tears. Usopp said the situation couldn't get any worse and asked whether it wouldn't be best for the four of them to leave before they were found by Arlong's crew. But Sanji was certain something was off. Zoro simply said she had kicked them out, and before they could argue again, Usopp said Nami was from the other crew, the evil one, and then pointed out that all the residents were afraid of her, until Luffy replied saying not all of them and called out to the guard. The rubber pirate took the lead, saying he would like to speak with the girl with the wild hair, and when it came to introductions, Zoro claimed they were all bounty hunters going after Arlong. The man said he had seen other people with the same objective before, bigger and stronger, and none of them ever came back. Finally, he gave in and told the group to walk to a house by the tangerine orchard, as they would find the young woman there. After walking a long stretch, they reached their destination and were greeted by a shotgun pointed at the entrance. Luffy appeared to be one of the few who wasn't frightened and began to say he had something in common with the young woman, mentioning Nami's name. Nojiko said the redhead was a thief, and that once she got what she wanted, she abandoned everything and left. When the straw hat revealed that Nami was part of the crew, Nojiko said her sister had no friends. Sanji, never missing an opportunity, said it made sense, as both of them were beautiful. But without paying much attention to the flirting, the blue-haired girl said she could see how much her sister had deceived them, and also made it clear that Luffy wasn't special and couldn't help him, until Sanji offered a meal in exchange for her time and the information she could provide. At first, Nojiko said she was fine and had already eaten and was resistant, but the cook managed to convince her that he worked miracles even with few ingredients. Usopp also confirmed that the food was the best in East Blue. With that, she agreed and said it was good to have dessert. Speaking of food, the very next scene is Garp relishing the steak made by Zeph, leaving all the other cadets a little unsettled, one might say. Shortly after, the chef returned to the dining room and asked the Vice Admiral whether the food was better than what the Marines served. Surprised, Garp replied that he didn't know Zeph had once had the privilege of tasting Marine food, and the braided beard man shot back that yes, in the brig. Without wasting time, Garp asked again about Luffy, as he knew the boy had passed through there. Zeph began stalling, talking about saving wine for a special occasion, and that he had decided to open it because he hadn't seen someone from the old guard in a while, even though they had fought on opposite sides. He then said he had quit the pirate life, not because of the law, but because it was truly time, claiming a new generation was coming in strong. The other disagreed, saying they were just impulsive kids. As a way of making an indirect point through analogy, Zeph said the wine was perfectly aged, but that if time kept passing, it would end up going bad. Shortly after, the two drank from their respective glasses, and Garp simply said he could serve whiskey instead. The scene cut to Arlong and his crew members enjoying a party, complete with music and drinks. Nami headed toward the captain, saying they needed to talk about Kokoyashi village, but the fishman said to leave it for the next day, as the village would still be there as long as they paid the full amount of the tribute. The redhead replied that was exactly the matter she wanted to discuss, and that it involved the agreement the two of them had made before. Arlong told her to relax, but before they could continue the conversation, a group of Marine members invaded the place. Using irony, the fishman said how pleasant it was to receive Captain Nezumi and the cadets. The man said he loved catching up, even though he had received concerning news from Gosa that they had been attacked by pirates. He then pointed out that fishmen were causing unrest on the Konomi Islands. Upon grasping what was being implied, Arlong grabbed the sum of money stored in the box Nami was carrying and handed it to Nezumi, who replied that he had other concerns. Arlong asked how many, and the other replied that it was double the amount that was there. Even though the pirate argued it was more than they had agreed upon, it wasn't enough to convince the Marine member, who said it was getting increasingly difficult to cover his allies' tracks, so they stepped away from the party to discuss the matter elsewhere, and Nami accompanied them. Meanwhile, Sanji served dinner for everyone. Nojiko said it was the best dish she had ever eaten in her life. The blonde said he could provide more, but he needed information about Nami. With that, the young woman began to recount the story, and once again we were taken back to the past. The next scene shows the red-haired woman rushing into the house with Nami, and then hiding both girls in a hiding spot in the floor. She also asked that neither of them come out, regardless of what they heard. Suddenly, Arlong entered the house with a henchman, and even though the girl's mother had fired a shot, the fishman grabbed her weapon and caused bullets to fire into the ceiling. He even asked if that was any way to receive guests. Then he demanded money from the tribute from the woman, who paid it. The henchman confirmed the amount was correct, but as he walked toward the door, Arlong noticed that there were 3 plates on the table and asked how many people lived there, 3 times. When she said she had nothing more, the pirate tried to strangle her, until Nami came out begging him not to touch her mother. Seeing there was no other way out, the woman offered the money to her daughters, and shortly after was killed by Arlong, since she had no way to pay her share. Back in the present, Usopp, shocked, asked if Nami was working for the pirate who had killed her own mother, and Nojiko answered yes. Luffy, completely stunned by the situation, left the room and Zoro went after him. The two were on the roof of Nojiko's house. At first, neither of them said anything until Luffy said Nami had just been a child. Zoro replied that she wasn't one anymore and had chosen a side. The Straw Hat then said he was tired of hearing people talk about his friend. Then the swordsman asked how the boy knew Nami wasn't part of Arlong's crew, and the rubber pirate replied that he also knew the bounty hunter wouldn't kill him in the courtyard of the marine base. He also said he was certain about Usopp and Sanji too, concluding that Nami was good and she needed to know that. With that, the two of them remained there in silence, watching the stars. The next scene showed Arlong and Nezumi trying to reach an agreement. Everything was going smoothly, until the marine captain said the Fish-man was smarter than people say. That led Arlong to ask a series of questions that put the other man in an awkward spot, trying to answer in a way that didn't make things worse for himself. After the pirate said he served no one, Nezumi decided to back down and returned all the money he had asked for. When they left, Nami asked about the agreement they had previously made and whether he would honor it. As a way of not leaving her without an answer, the pirate said she should bring the money at dawn and the matter would be settled. As soon as Nami left, Arlong asked one of his henchmen to call Nezumi back, and in the end let it slip that perhaps the rat could get a little extra cash in the end, referring to the marine captain. Meanwhile, at the Barati, Helmeppo asked for 2 drinks, one for himself and one for Koby, who didn't want to accept since both of them were on duty. Morgan's son asked if the other boy didn't drink and then said he didn't understand Garp's obsession with Luffy. That sentence made Koby down the shot right then and there, and he even wanted 2 more rounds. After drinking the second shot, he asked Helmeppo whether the Marines were doing the right thing, saying that maybe the Straw Hat's crew wasn't so bad after all. Surprised that his colleague was already turning into a mutineer, Morgan's son asked Koby to just come out with it, and so the boy revealed that Luffy was Garp's grandson and immediately drank the 3rd shot. Helmeppo wasn't expecting that, but said it now made sense why he was being pursued. Then Koby noticed that the other cadet identified a little with Luffy by the way he talked about the subject. The other cadet said he had nothing to do with the rubber pirate, but before they could continue the conversation, the bartender said that a few days earlier, a boy with a straw hat had been through there. When asked if he knew Luffy's whereabouts, the man replied perhaps, and asked how much that information was worth. Meanwhile, Zeph was telling Garp some of the countless stories from his past. Then the Vice Admiral said he didn't want to feel tricked by the stories, but the owner replied that he didn't, and that the last thing he wanted was to get mixed up in a family quarrel. He then said Luffy was very special, adding that the boy reminded him of Gold Roger. Garp was a bit irritated and reminded him what the pirate's fate had been, executed by the Marines. He then almost let the word grandson slip into the conversation, but managed to stop himself and said he didn't want the Straw Hat to end up the same way. Zeph said the rubber pirate had defended the restaurant when they were attacked, and that even though he was retired, he still followed the code. Until Koby and Helmeppo walked into the dining room, and the first boy whispered something in the Vice Admiral's ear, who simply thanked them for the food, and then asked the navigator to plot a course for the Konomi Islands. Zeph tried to stop him, telling the man to leave Luffy alone and arguing that times had changed. But the words weren't enough, and Garp went after his grandson. The next scene showed Usopp trying to make smoke bombs, but being distracted by Buggy, who was attempting to pull some pranks. As a way to get the clown to stop talking, Sanji grabbed an orange and shoved it in his mouth. Then we see Nami heading somewhere and beginning to dig. Beside her was her mother's grave. When the redhead managed to retrieve the chest she needed, she was surprised by Nojiko, who tried to stop her but ended up breaking the box and revealing what was inside, jewels worth a great deal of money. The blue-haired young woman was outraged, thinking her sister was stealing their mother's money right beside her grave. With that, Nami decided to reveal the truth, and we were transported back to the past once more. The little redhead went to find Arlong, saying she needed to speak with him. Upon revealing her name and the fact that her mother had been killed by his hands, the Fish-man remembered immediately. At first, the pirate thought the girl wanted to avenge her mother, but was surprised to hear that she wanted to join the crew. Everyone began to laugh, and Arlong asked why he would accept a human into the group, until Nami said she had something the captain would want. She then placed a map in his hands, surprised to see it was all very well drawn, even going as far as saying it was the best map he had ever seen in East Blue. Arlong began to grow suspicious. He then asked why the girl wanted to work for him, given that he had killed her mother just days before, and she replied that there was something she wanted very badly, Back in the present, the redhead revealed that the deal was, the pirate would sell Kokoyashi village back to Nami for 100 million berries. With that, Arlong agreed, and the deal was made. Nojiko said it would take a lifetime to gather that money, but her sister claimed she had already done it and was going to buy the place and the freedom of its residents. Nojiko sat beside Nami and asked why the redhead hadn't told her any of this. After all, the two of them were sisters. Nami replied that she didn't want to lose her or anyone else. Indignant at the information, Nojiko confessed that she had hated her for all those years, while in reality, her sister had only been trying to help. However, the two were interrupted by the Marines, who claimed to know of the existence of pirates in the area who were hiding loot nearby, and also revealed that the contents of the chest were stolen. Therefore, they would have to confiscate them. Nami said they couldn't do that, as everything there belonged to her. But Nezumi stated that the box contained 100 million berries, and asked how the young woman had gotten that money. Upon realizing Arlong had sent the Marines after her, Nami tried to fight back, but the men were faster and grabbed her. Others then collected the 100 million that was in the chest. The redhead screamed furiously, going after them to get everything back and prevent Kokoyashi village from being destroyed. The next scene showed Arlong giving a speech to his crew members, talking about how fishmen had been enslaved by humans for a long time, but that now he would lead a revolution where his species would become supreme, all with the help of the maps, and with that would also dominate East Blue. As he spoke, there were flashes of Nami running in an attempt to keep the captain's plan from succeeding, but she stopped midway, screaming his name and crying. She also began to hurt herself with a knife, striking her own arm, where the Arlong crew's tattoo was, until Luffy grabbed her hand. Nami said she had asked him to leave, and the boy confirmed. Again, she told her friend to leave her alone, as he didn't understand the situation. But then the young woman changed her mind and, in tears, asked the rubber pirate for help, and in an emotional moment, Luffy placed the straw hat on Nami's head, agreeing that he would stand by her. The episode ended with the protagonist turning around and shouting at the top of his lungs that he was going to help his friend, who was moved to tears by the sight of it. He then called for Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp, and as soon as everyone confirmed, the last one drew their attention by asking what was happening a few miles away. With that, they realized Kokoyashi village was being attacked by Arlong and his crew. Nami was forced to get tattooed, still as a child, with the saw shark symbol, marking her as a member of Arlong's crew. Then, while he spoke about the girl drawing maps that would help him conquer East Blue, as well as regarding the deal they had made, scenes of her new daily life were shown. Shortly after, we returned to the present, where she, alongside Luffy, Sanji, Usopp, and Zoro, looked at Kokoyashi village completely destroyed. The villagers arrived shortly after, saying they already knew about Nami's sacrifice through Nojiko, and everyone said they would fight for their freedom or die trying. But the redhead said the fight was hers, until Luffy corrected it to ours, referring to the entire crew. Everyone agreed to fight, but Usopp was a bit apprehensive, since he had seen the fishmen fighting at the Barati. Zoro said everyone had weaknesses, and the Straw Hat agreed, pointing out that they would discover what those were in the moment. The next scene showed Nezumi being brought to Garp's room, who was not at all pleased to learn about the pirate activity taking place in Kokoyashi village, and was also bothered by the fact that Arlong and his henchmen were circulating freely through the Konomi Islands. Upon hearing everything, the captain tried to turn the situation around, saying Luffy was responsible for every brutal attack in the area. Koby got involved in the conversation, insisting his friend would never do something like that. Nezumi asked if the boy was suggesting he was a liar, but that he wouldn't do such a thing since he was a marine captain. With no patience, Garp pointed out that he was a vice admiral and that there was no need for any more rank pulling. Nezumi apologized, saying he would stop the pirates, but Garp said no. He then looked at the map and wondered aloud where his grandson could be. Meanwhile, members of Arlong's crew were apparently removing some barrels from the place until they were attacked by Luffy and the crew. Nami and Luffy headed toward the map room, where Arlong would most likely be. With that, fighting the rest of the fishmen fell to Sanji, Usopp, and Zoro. The two arrived at the room, which was empty. While the redhead searched for the map, the Straw Hat looked around the room and noticed some chains that were there, until his friend said the captain had chained her up at age 12 as a birthday present. Then Nami told them they should leave, but Arlong showed up right at that moment. Afterward, we see Usopp being chased by one of the crew members who drank a liquid to try to hit his opponent, but the boy managed to dodge the attacks and even hid behind a tree trunk. Sanji and Zoro were still fighting against their opponents at Arlong Park. Meanwhile, Nami and Luffy listened to Arlong giving a speech about how fishmen had been enslaved by humans for a long time, but that now he would lead a revolution where his species would become supreme, all with the help of the maps, and would also dominate East Blue. Suddenly, the captain pressed his blade against the boy's neck, threatening to kill him. What nobody expected was that the Straw Hat would use his own strength to break the enemy's weapon in two. Luffy also stood up in his friend's defense, saying she was a person with feelings and that his opponent had taken her dreams away. He then said the enemy was no better than Morgan, Axe Hand, or Kuro the fake butler, making it clear he would put an end to the villain's kind. He then asked Nami to get out. The redhead ran, and Arlong even tried to stop her, but Luffy held him back with a punch. He also said the following words to his enemy. Round 2, Arlong. The scene cut to one of the captain's henchmen searching for Usopp in the forest. He tried to land a blow but slipped and fell. Then we see Sanji and Zoro continuing to fight the fishmen. They even found time to take jabs at each other between each battle, but they were interrupted by Buggy, who asked the two of them to look for his body, which was nearby. The blonde picked up the clown's head, who soon found the rest of his torso and was whole again. He then left the scene. Back in the forest, Arlong's henchman found Usopp lying on the ground and walked away thinking the boy was dead. But it was just a trick. He had only been waiting for the enemy to get close and give him the perfect opportunity to shoot, and he succeeded. Because of the alcohol, the fishman ended up catching fire all over. Even though no one had seen it, he was proud of himself for defeating someone. Back at Arlong Park, the scenes alternated between Luffy and Arlong's fight and Sanji and Zoro against another fishman, who appeared out of nowhere. In the first battle, the Straw Hat was struggling to defeat the villain. Even with his powers and even managing to land a punch that broke the captain's teeth, it wasn't enough. But Luffy's motivation was what Arlong had done to Nami, which was more than enough to keep fighting. And the villain kept provoking him, saying terrible things or belittling the redhead, until the Straw Hat had an idea. Since he couldn't defeat the enemy, he could destroy everything the villain had built. And so he did. Using his powers, he began punching pillars and walls, which gradually began to crumble. Outside, Sanji and Zoro couldn't defeat their opponent until he said that Nami had been wrong to trust them because they were weak. That ignited the blonde's rage, who unleashed a flurry of kicks and managed to knock out the fishman. Then the bounty hunter made fun of one of the names Sanji had called out during the fight. But when the blonde said that every fighter worth their salt announces their moves, the swordsman concluded that he fit right into the crew. After all, Luffy said the same thing. Shortly after, Usopp arrived shouting, but upon realizing the battle was over, simply told the others they had done a good job. Then Nami appeared running and hugged only Usopp and Zoro. Sanji was left embarrassed since he had already opened his arms to welcome her. When they asked about Luffy, she replied that her friend was inside, facing the captain. The scene cut back to the two still in combat, with everything crumbling around them. The Straw Hat delivered a series of punches to the villain, who was sent flying into a wall. Enraged at seeing a human destroying Arlong Park, Arlong launched himself at Luffy, who simply used his own leg to bring the ceiling crashing down on the villain, causing the entire map room to come down. Outside, the crew was stunned by what they were seeing. When the place collapsed entirely, they feared the Straw Hat had died and stood with tear-filled eyes and devastated expressions, until Luffy stretched out his own arm, showing he had survived. With a leap, he emerged from the rubble and headed toward Nami, saying she was their crewmate, and that together they were a crew. Sanji, Usopp, and Zoro began to laugh, relieved to see their captain was alive, and shortly after moved to tears. Nami also smiled. That night, all the villagers were celebrating Arlong's defeat, listening to music, laughing, and of course eating thanks to Sanji, who had prepared a wonderful feast. Najiko, one of the people in line, said she wanted the blonde's recipes and told him to write a book. Never missing an opportunity, besides saying a man didn't reveal his secrets, he offered to give the young woman private lessons. Shortly after, Zoro went to get another serving. And of course, Sanji wasn't going to let that go without comment. As always, the two traded jabs at each other, until the swordsman walked away with his full plate. Meanwhile, Usopp was recounting the story of how he, all on his own, defeated every single enemy. The others watched, laughing heartily, until Luffy called for a cheer for Captain Usopp. But since nothing is ever perfect, the Marines ended up arriving at the scene shortly after. Immediately, Garb ordered them to arrest the Straw Hat crew. But to the Vice Admiral's surprise, Koby opposed the decision. And not only him, Helmeppo also refused. With that, other cadets pointed their weapons at Nami, Sanji, Usopp, and Zoro, while Garp headed toward his grandson and said he had given Luffy numerous opportunities to become a respected officer, but the boy had instead chosen to be a pirate. But Luffy countered, telling his grandfather that in truth, he had always been a pirate. The Vice Admiral said he was giving him one last chance to give up. But as we know, giving up is not a word in the Straw Hats' vocabulary. And so, a fight between the two began. As they traded blows, they kept taking shots at each other. Luffy tried to hit his grandfather, who dodged and then landed a punch on him. With that, Garp lifted his grandson and said the Grand Line was no joke and that the boy wasn't ready. But the Straw Hat shot back, saying he would not give up on his dream, making it clear he would find the One Piece and then become king of the pirates. When Luffy started to laugh, he caught a glimpse of the image of Gold Roger on the day of his execution. And shortly after, Garp also let out a wicked laugh, releasing his grandson and telling the cadets to lower their weapons. He then ordered all the soldiers to fall back and go after Arlong. Nezumi still tried to intervene, but Nami landed a blow to his head. Before leaving, Garp said a few words to his grandson, telling the boy he was stubborn just like himself, but wanted to know if Luffy was certain of who he was. Upon realizing he was being tested, the Straw Hat asked if his grandfather couldn't have gone a little easier on him. Then the Vice Admiral walked up to the rubber pirate and told him he was on his own, but Luffy shot back saying no, because he had his friends. The man then left, and the entire crew smiled at their captain. The scene cut to Nami sitting by her mother's grave, saying she had done it. She was free. She also apologized for not understanding the sacrifices the woman had made for her back then. The redhead said that now she knew what it meant to fight for family and would never lose sight of that again. She also said that even if it was too late, she hoped her mother was proud of her. Suddenly, a voice confirmed the statement and added that she was also proud of Nami. It was Nojiko. Shortly after, the blue-haired young woman asked how her sister's arm was, and Nami thanked her for the concern. The two talked at length, finally understanding each other. But first, Nojiko reminded her that no matter where the redhead went, there would always be a place to come back to, and that Kokoyashi village was her home. Then, Nami said goodbye to her mother, and the two walked together in another direction. Meanwhile, Luffy was eating a tangerine when Koby appeared. The cadet brought a surprise for his friend. At last, the Straw Hat's face was on a wanted poster. Koby also pointed out that the reward was the highest in East Blue. The two embraced, and the Marine said it was a farewell. Both of them wished each other well in what they had chosen to be. Then the rubber pirate went to the Going Merry to show the poster to the crew. Zoro said things would now get harder, since every bounty hunter would come after him. And Nami said, not just the captain, but the rest of the group too. But Luffy said they wouldn't be staying in East Blue, since they were heading to the Grand Line. The scenes that followed showed people looking at Luffy's wanted poster. First Makino, then Kaya, followed by Zeph, then Buggy and Alvida, who were in the same place, and finally Garp, who remarked that in the end, his grandson had taken after him. Afterward, Koby and Helmeppo entered the Vice Admiral's room, expecting to be punished. But to their surprise, the man said that a good Marine follows their own code and has a sense of justice. With that, he congratulated the two cadets, but warned them he would train them even if the method was considered intense. Both agreed, as each of them wanted to pursue an objective and grow stronger. And the Vice Admiral agreed with Zeph, since the new generation was coming in strong. Meanwhile, Mihawk was on the beach, heading towards Shanks. For a brief moment, the captain thought the other pirate wanted to fight, but he had simply come to deliver to the red-haired man the wanted poster with Luffy's face. Shanks smiled with pride, seeing that the boy had managed to reach his goal, and said that achievement called for a celebration. Then we see the Straw Hat showing that he had placed 3 small tangerine trees on the Going Merry as a memento of Kokoyashi village for Nami. She said it was perfect, and also said the crew had a gift for the captain. When Usopp unfurled the mainsail, the drawing the Straw Hat had made earlier was revealed as their flag. Luffy's reaction was simply to shout. He was so happy to see it. Then Nami said the entrance to the Grand Line wasn't far away, but thought there might be some error in the map. And the boy replied that she would probably figure it out, since she was the navigator. Then Sanji called the captain over, because he had an idea. Seeing the blonde reaching for a barrel, the rubber pirate gathered everyone in the crew for a ceremonial meeting on deck. Each of them placed a foot on the barrel and spoke about what their goal would be from that point forward. As they spoke, images of each of them as children appeared. Finally, Luffy shouted that nothing would stand in their way. Out of nowhere, a person appeared burning Luffy's wanted poster with a cigar. Who could it be? That was the summary of the first season of One Piece the series. an incredible live-action series that won over countless fans. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to receive more summaries. This channel is 100% focused on summaries. On the screen you'll find 2 more summaries. Click and watch because they're just as incredible as this one.